Yeah, hi. We're at the grave here of the known as the Elephant Man, Joseph Merrick, who was born on the 5th of August 1862 in Leicester, born a perfectly normal child. His mother was Mary and his father was Joseph. And they said at the age of 5 years old, growth started developing on his face. By the time he was 11 in 1879, his mother died, and then his father remarried, and his stepmother Emily didn't like Joseph Merrick. He was sent out to work at a cigar shop, and they said he found the work difficult because one of his hands, his fingers was 5 inches long. And by 1879 he ended up in the workhouse, and then he read about a travelling freak show which he joined in 1884, run by Sam Tor. In 1886 he was then in a penny gift gaff shop on the Whitechapel Road working for a guy called Tom Norman, and that's where Dr. Frederick Treves first encountered the Elephant Man. He examined him, put him on display to the Royal Pathological Society, and then Joseph Merrick again went abroad, but he was robbed by his owner, and he made his way back to London on the boat train from Ostend to Harwich, and then eventually he arrived at Liverpool Street and was picked up by the police. Frederick Treves took him in at the London Hospital, and then he became a permanent patient, a permanent resident of the London Hospital. He lived in 2 rooms in Bedstead Square for the last 4 years of his life. And then they said on the 10th of April 1890 he tried to sleep like a normal human being, put his head back, he broke his neck and died of asphyxia. So what we actually see in here, that when his autopsy happened, his brain was preserved, his skeleton was preserved and still displayed to medical students, but what was left over is soft tissue, heart, liver, lungs, spleen, genitals. That's what they buried here on the 24th of April 1890, put into a pauper's grave, and then which was discovered 5 years ago by a Leicester journalist under the name Vigor. Yeah, we're now at the spot of the Newgate Prison site reburials. Newgate Prison was shut down in 1903, so they exhumed 1,000 people from the Newgate Prison site and put them into 50 bags, and basically 50 bags of human remains went down this spot. So out of these 1,000 people that are buried here, one in particular was a chap called Michael Barrett. He was born in 1841 in County Fermanagh in Ireland. 1843 to 1849 was the time of the Great Potato Famine in Ireland, and over 1 million people died and 2 million more emigrated, mostly United States, Canada, Australia and New Zealand, and Michael Barrett was no different from the rest of them. By 1860 he was working as a stevedore in the docks in Glasgow, and he joined a group called the Irish Republican Brotherhood, otherwise known as the Fenians. On the 13th of December 1867, the group put dynamite and a fuse into the walls at Clerkenwell Prison to get out 2 of their members, one being Richard O'Sullivan Burke, who was a senior arms agent. Everything went dreadfully wrong. They used too much dynamite and basically blew the prison up and the surrounding flats, so 12 people died and over 100 were injured. So the police went out and rounded up 5 Irishmen, one of them being Michael Barrett. It went to court. The 4 other chaps got acquitted on lack of evidence, but Michael Barrett, who had good character witnesses saying that he wasn't there when the bombing happened, the police brought in a paid informant by the name of Patrick Mullaney from Dublin. He came in, he fingered Michael Barrett saying he's the man who put the dynamite into the wall, I saw him do it, and the jury went out and deliberated. They came back with a guilty verdict. Gladstone at the time wanted more inquiries, MPs were calling for a retrial, but Queen Victoria pushed for the death penalty. So on the 26th of May 1868, outside the grounds of Newgate Prison, Michael Barrett was taken to the scaffold, 2,000 people watching, cheering his last breaths, and they pulled the trapdoor. He was taken down, put into a grave, covered with quicklime, and basically forgotten about for 35 years. And then we was reburied here in 1903. I was here a couple of years ago with the chaps called the Fenians, and they also are trying for a posthumous pardon for Michael Barrett. We're now at the grave of Elizabeth Ann Everest, Now, Elizabeth Ann Everest was born in 1832 in Chatham in Kent, and in 1875 she was invited to work at the family residence of Lady Randolph Churchill, who was the mother of Winston Churchill. So Elizabeth Ann Everest was the nanny to Winston Churchill and his brother Jack, and then sadly she was dismissed from the family in 1893 after 18 years loyal service, and she went back in 1894 to live with her sister in Finsbury Park, and sadly she died in July 1895 in Finsbury Park. She was aged 63, and Winston Churchill and his brother attended the funeral here in 1895. They paid for this gravestone and a local florist to upkeep the maintenance of the grave, and that family tradition has still been maintained by the Churchill Foundation to this day. The grave of Elizabeth Ann Everest. Okay, I'm now in the centre of Manor Park Cemetery, and we're at the grave of Joyce and Ronald McQueen, and this was the parents of the fashion designer Alexander McQueen. Alexander McQueen was born in Lewisham in 1969, but lived the early part of his life in Stratford. He lived at 11 Biggerstaff Road from 1971 to 1987. He attended Carpenter's Road and Rokeby School, and then he went to work at Taylor's at Savile Row, and then got into the fashion industry. By 1992 he had his own fashion label. He also worked for Givenchy, he worked for Gucci, and by the time he was nearly 40 years old, this guy was a multi-millionaire, and he owned offices in Milan, Los Angeles, New York. Kate Middleton's wedding dress was made by him, Beyonce, David Bowie, Kate Moss. The list was endless of who this guy, they were buying his fashion. Tragically, his mother Joyce died in 2010, in October of 2010, and the night before her funeral, Alexander McQueen sadly took his own life. He was only 40 years old, and his mother was laid to rest here in October 2010. She was a school teacher, and his father, Ronald McQueen, who died in 2012, was a London black cab driver. Alexander McQueen had 3 brothers, 2 sisters, so this was their final resting place here in Manor Park Cemetery. Yeah, hi, I'm in Manor Park Cemetery and we're at the Bethnal Green tube disaster part of the cemetery. This has only been recently discovered on the history route that they've put here into the cemetery. On the night of the 3rd of March 1943, at 8:15 in the evening, people heard the air raid sirens go off, but there wasn't a single German bomber in the sky. It was actually a Z battery using anti-aircraft rockets. People panicked, started making their way down to Bethnal Green tube station. One person fell over, the rest followed. It resulted in 173 people dying, being crushed to death, 62 of which were children. And they made a film about it a few years ago called It's a Lovely Day Tomorrow. But apparently the casualties were sprawled out on the Bethnal Green Road and the Cambridge Heath Road, and paramedics and doctors turned up from 8 different hospitals in London to take the casualties to hospital. But the first person on the scene was an off-duty police officer called PC Penn, and he went in several times pulling the injured and the dying out, and until he was overcome and until the emergency services turned up. They're remembered every year in Bethnal Green. On the Cambridge Heath Road there's the Stairway to Heaven, dedicated to the 173 people who lost their lives. It was the worst civilian disaster of World War II, and Winston Churchill had it covered up for 40 years. The truth was not known, but now we know the truth. Here is the truth. So these graves have obviously been, I don't know, uncovered from different parts of the cemetery. Yes, today's episode of Homicide Hunter is ending here at Manor Park Cemetery, and this is a new grave to the second victim of Jack the Ripper. So it's Annie Chapman, who died on the 8th of September 1888 at Hanbury Street in Whitechapel. The second victim of Jack the Ripper, she had been divorced from her husband, who was a coachman. Sadly, they both took to drinking because of a death of one of their children. And when she was buried here in September 1888, they said that over 1,000 people attended the funeral. Until recently, all she had was a plaque down there to say she was buried somewhere in the vicinity. Now, this grave is 1 month old. So that means out of the 5 chronological 5 of Jack the Ripper, Mary Kelly, Elizabeth Stride and now Annie Chapman all have gravestones, and I think this one is the finest. And you notice down here that money's been left, and this happens at all the graves of Jack the Ripper. So basically, back in the day, that these women were selling themselves for 2pence got you asleep on the rope, and 4pence got you a cot for the evening. I hope you enjoyed today's episode of Homicide Hunter.